Yeah, it just was something that where Wisconsin really never seemed to be able to get going. Offensively, defensively, they're having struggles. The guards for Michigan were playing well, playing past Wisconsin's defense, and it was just it's such a bad loss to a bad Michigan team. And you're coming off a couple of losses here against Nebraska and Purdue. And it's like, okay, there's reasons for a couple of those. A tough place to play in Nebraska. They played pretty well against Purdue, but just weren't able to pull it out. And then it just seemed like that they didn't have any gas. So they didn't have any juice left for that Michigan game. And it just, they were never able to get themselves going. And it felt like rock bottom for this team. I was talking about this on the post-game show. It feels like, and perhaps hopefully this is rock bottom for this team this season, losing 3 games in a row now, losing to the worst team in the Big Ten, the worst team in the standings. Michigan had lost 10 of their last 11. They had been just so struggling this year, and it felt like, hopefully, this was rock bottom.
Yeah, the Badgers, if you could take their last 3 games and mix up their performances against each of those groups, it's possible they win both Nebraska and Michigan. If they played the way they did against Nebraska, against Michigan, they probably win that game because Michigan doesn't have the firepower to come back from down 18. Yeah. And if you take this performance against Michigan, it was consistent in the first half and the second half. I'd imagine you probably would have beaten Nebraska if you could have had 2 okay halves like they did against the Wolverines. The problem for me in these last 3 contests, and it might be as simple as this, is Steven Crowell's 4 fouls in each game. His inability to stay on the court and play that Mr. Consistent role that we've seen him play this season so effectively that we barely ever have to talk about him. It's always, well, Steve had 12 and 7 tonight, and of course he had a block, and his 4 assists really opened up the offense for the Badgers. Last week when we did our first edition of Badgers in 60, we had a fun fact of, well, Davis, look at this. Steve Crowell, he's 2 assists away from passing Frank Kaminsky for the most assists for a 7-footer or taller in the last 20 years. Well, he's only gotten 1 assist over the last 3 games, so he's still tied with Frank. Hopefully he passes him against Rutgers, but I think that's been their biggest problem. Right now, it's just getting Steve back in rhythm, back aggressive, back under the rim, where he's the best and most effective player on the Badgers, in my opinion.
Yeah, the Wisconsin had 40 points in the paint against Michigan. The points were there to be had. It was definitely open in the paint all night long, but Steven Crowell, just 3 points. He did not take a lot of shots, did not get a lot of points, and obviously the foul trouble was a big part of that. He wasn't on the court a ton, so that just played into it. But Tyler Wall, still 12 points. I mean, Chucky Hepburn actually had a really good game there with 17. But yeah, this is the recipe for this team. It's an inside-out offense. They always have to get the touches in the paint, in the post, and Steven Crowell's a big part of that. And he was not able to be a part of that in this game against Michigan. And that's why, that's one of the contributing reasons why they were not able to get a win against the worst team in the conference, on top of the defense just not being consistent in either half, and Greg Gard talked about this a lot. He's always harping on the defense. We know he is. That's been another part of the identity for Wisconsin basketball for years now, and it just was not good enough against Michigan.
Let's hear from Greg Gard, by the way, after last night's game. This is his post-game interview at the table with Matt LePay and Brian Butch.
Greg, Butch and I, we're looking at the stat sheet. We're watching the game, and we see rebounds, we see points off turnovers, this, that, or the other. What's the first thing that concerns or jumps to you about tonight?
Defensively, not keeping the ball in front of us. The ball got, downhill. We've had this issue before. That and the turnovers. I thought, the shot selection, we took a few bad ones, but that wasn't the issue. It was defensively not being able to keep the ball out of the paint, specifically with McDaniel. We knew that was going to be a problem. We just didn't get the ball stopped. And then the second half, the fouling. When we did get it stopped, then we fouled too much to give up, 18 free throws. And so we got to break down this film, and it's another game where we had trouble with quick guards that were able to get inside our defense and figure out who and what and how and get this fixed, and the turnover factor. So Again, we were really good Sunday. Now we go back to coughing it up way too much. So we'll get a lot of soul searching to do here and learning to do over the next few days. Good thing we get to all stick together and learn from this and keep moving.
Coach, when you talk about kind of some of the good things, you guys had 40 points in the paint, only gave up 20. Did you feel like you got there enough, or did you feel like there was opportunities that were still left out there?
Yeah, in stretches we got there, Brian.
Yeah.
I didn't think we got there enough. We did for a little bit, and then we'd go away from it, and then we'd get back to it. I think, Steve never got in a rhythm. I think the foul trouble got him out of rhythm, and he was kind of removed, so to speak, from having an impact in the game. So that's part of it. But there was things. AJ got there more, which was a better step from what we've seen before. Not all the time, but we've got to, he's got to continue to get there. I thought Chucky got there more. But the problem was the defensive end of it. We couldn't keep the ball out of the paint. And then the turnovers, giving that many back to them in a lower possession game, 65, 67 possessions. You can't play winning basketball when you turn it over, that many times.
So pretty clearly annoyed Greg Gard after last night's game, fellas. And, Dave, you were talking about the concept of rock bottom. I don't know that I believe in rock bottom, because can anything ever get worse? Sure. Things can always get worse. They can always get worse. I look at these 3 games, and I know it's a different sport, but just your immediate reaction to this. These 3 games remind me of 3 games the football team played this year. Now, they weren't in the same order, but they played a decent game against Ohio State and still lost. That was the Purdue game. Now, that was the sandwich game in between Nebraska and last night's game against Michigan. But they also lost to a terrible Indiana team, and they lost to an almost as bad Northwestern team. And then you had to think, well, how good is this football team? Is this rock bottom? But there's something that's fortunate just about the nature of basketball as opposed to the nature of football, is that you've got so many more games in basketball, and you've also got a tournament. I mean, let's face it, the Badgers, something catastrophic would have to happen for Wisconsin not to make the NCAAs. It's a foregone conclusion. There's time to right the ship, whereas in football, maybe not necessarily as much.
Yeah, and I raised this point too on the post-game show last night. Just how it felt like that football, the football season, the loss to Indiana, where it's just kind of like, okay, that's got to be the worst part of this, right? And football, obviously, they bounced back to end the season when winning their last couple of games, making it to the bowl game for the 22nd, 23rd year in a row, something like that.
Continued in that streak, right? Not hitting the colossal, most challenging way to get your career started in Madison's situation, right? If Fickle didn't make a bowl game in year 1, that would have been, we wouldn't have heard the end of it, right? We would be wondering if he would be the future head coach, because that means so much to this group, to this fan base, to this city, that you make that bowl game, that you can continue at least reconciling some of these subpar seasons with above average play. But I'm with you, Dave, right? You pointed that out in the post-game show last night. Really. You've been telling me the same thing, that this feels like the football team, like they're going to have their opportunity here, this basketball group, to do exactly what the football team did, which was just get back on track and finish the season strong. I believe this group has higher ceiling, right? The football team was in a position where they were like, let's salvage this season. Just a week ago, we were doing this show and the Badgers were 16-4. And we were, could they pull off the win at Nebraska? And
they're going to be a 2
seed,
Purdue?
Right?
Yeah.
And Raphael Davis on Big Ten Network was saying that they were a Final Four team. This was better than the 2014 or 2015 Wisconsin group, right?
Yeah. Well, they've been doing a lot of the things that haven't been done since then. As we bring up on Fun Facts with Dave all the time, it's like, the last time a Wisconsin team or a Wisconsin player did this was 2014, 2015. It's like, oh, okay. Well, that's quite the comparison. So we've seen that a bunch. It definitely is a higher ceiling team. We've seen them play really great basketball, but they just haven't been able to put it together these past couple of games, a complete 40 minutes. And that's just where it's gotten them into a little bit of trouble. Maybe a midseason rut, but you still have a month here before you finish out the regular season where you can get back on track. You got the Rutgers game coming up this weekend. So you do have some time here. You can get some momentum, but you got to be playing your best basketball heading into March. Playing great basketball in December and January and all that is great. It really is. But you have to be playing it heading into March. Otherwise, when you get to the tournament, it's going to be hard to flip that switch and just all of a sudden start playing great basketball if you aren't playing it in the weeks leading up.
Yeah, you're judged by what you do in March, whether that's fair or not. I mean, we talk about teams that make Cinderella runs in the NCAA tournament all the time, and they're the ones that are the most memorable. And then we also talk about how a top seed, Virginia, lost to a number 16 seed, and we talk about it all these years later, and forgetting about the fact that the next year Virginia won the national championship. So whether, again, it's the nature of the playoffs, right? I mean, we talk about, even in football, we talk about the Packers having these incredible regular seasons. The first 3 seasons under Matt LaFleur, they were a 13-win team. They had home field advantage throughout the playoffs. They got the number 1 seed, and they were able to earn a bye week. Well, what did that mean when all was said and done? Didn't mean anything. You look at the Bucks, when they were the number 1 seed, they would flame out in the playoffs like they did last year. They flamed out in the first round of the playoffs last year when they won the NBA championship. They were the 3rd seed. So you just have to be playing the best at the right time. And if you're going to have some clunkers, and let's face it, last night was an absolute clunker. I would rather have the clunker on February 7th than I would on, March 14th.
And I'm satisfied that the clunker for the Badgers was a 4-point loss, right? That this group in their worst is still in a competitive basketball game. And get it, it's Michigan. An advantage for Michigan is that they had Doug McDaniel, who doesn't play road games, right? He had 16 points in this game. So Michigan is probably fool's gold when you consider them the quote-unquote worst team in the Big Ten. I get it. They have been very bad. And you lose to this team, and it doesn't look great, and it hurts you in the net rating, right? Mike on the show today, on the Mike Heller show, he was saying, I thought it'd be a greater fall. They went from 13th to 15th in the net rating. Not that far of a drop. You can reconcile this loss with an easy win, hopefully, against Rutgers on Saturday. You come back home for Ohio State, who's also in the cellar of the Big Ten, and then you move on with Iowa. This is an opportunity, again, for Greg Gard to continue to prove the people that think he can't coach wrong. We didn't hear anything from anyone for so long, and now we've got people every day messaging in, well, this is what Greg Gard does. His teams squander the opportunity late in the season, and he's a 2-time Big Ten champion as a head coach in the last handful of seasons, but that doesn't mean anything because he doesn't do anything in March. Outside of Tom Izzo, I'm not so sure there's any coaches in the Big Ten that can hold up their March resume and say much of anything. And he's the 6th fastest to 100 wins. So anybody who feels like Greg Gard can't coach, I feel like they're just doing it to be a troll. They're not serious. And if they are serious, I would wonder what their qualifications for a good coach are.
I think that there are a lot of people who are serious about that and who are what I would call true fans. I will say this, though, about, your basketball acumen. It's terrible. Greg Gard can coach. If you think that Greg Gard can't coach, you don't know basketball. I'm sorry. Greg Gard is a very good coach. His biggest sin, and really his only sin, is that he followed Bo Ryan. And Bo Ryan got this team to back-to-back Final Fours. And
13th and 14th year in Madison, right?
Yes.
I think that was
and they had deep runs. They had Elite 8 runs. They had Sweet 16 runs, and they made it to the NCAA tournament every year. I don't want this to, be Bo versus Greg or anything like that. And the Badgers made a Final Four run in the year 2000. That was a Cinderella run under Dick Bennett. Prior to that, the last time before 2000 that the Badgers had made it to the Final Four, do you know what year it was? Either one of you?
Was that 1941?
It was 1941.
Well,
Very good, Dave.
Yeah.
It was 1941. Now that's the one year that they won the NCAA championship. That you can still see it hanging in the rafters of the Kohl Center. But
I wonder if FDR was there.
Was he still? Yeah, he was still president then. Yes, he was still
if he was
president.
celebrating.
You never
Big
know.
win.
Who's to say? I don't know. Maybe he was. Maybe maybe Bud Foster got a phone call from FDR after the game was over. Who's to say?
Did they visit the White House back then? Was that a thing?
I don't think that was.
I think they were a little busy around that time.
Well, the World War
I think
II.
Reagan started that. I'm not sure, but I think Reagan started that.
Well, there you go.
Makes
sense.
But
history lesson here on Badgers and 60.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Badgers in 60 is, if nothing else, we like to give you an historical perspective of things. But I would, again, here's your historical perspective. The bar has been raised, and that's a good thing, and that's a great thing. If this team was rolling out 7-8 win teams every single year, then you'd be able to have the conversation about whether or not Greg Gard was the right man for the job. There's no question that Greg Gard is the right man for this job. And I'm to the point where I don't even want to hear it anymore.
Yeah.
I don't want to
Yeah.
engage with your stupidity. I don't want to even acknowledge the fact that you think you know something about basketball, because you don't. Greg Gard every single year has this team right where they need to be. And have they had some postseason failures? Sure, absolutely. They've also had a couple of postseason injuries. I mean, Chucky Hepburn had a sprained ankle away from the Badgers going to the Sweet 16 a couple of years ago. So
I wonder if there's
just
as
relax, everybody.
Anti-Matt Painter rhetoric in West Lafayette or anti-Fran McCaffrey, in Iowa. I wonder if their fans are as egregious with their distaste for that head coach, because I get it. Both of those guys have had great regular seasons. They've both won Big Ten tournaments in the last 2 years, and they've both lost in the first round of the NCAA tournament the last 2 years. But I don't know if their fans say that.
Again, the only sin that Greg Gard has committed was following Bo Ryan. That's it.
Sure. Yeah.
That's it. That's the only thing that you can point to. And I'm not saying that because we're the Badger station. I've said this consistently in the last 3 stations that I've been at.
Sure.
Just don't bring that stupidity to the table. What's the saying? You can be thought of as a fool and keep your mouth shut, or, tell everybody that you are by opening your mouth. Tell everybody that you're a fool by opening your mouth. Keep your mouth shut, because you don't know what you're talking about. And I'm just, I hear this all the time, and I'm so sick of it.
This is like, Doug's like the guy on my shoulder that I don't go to during the post game.
He's grabbed
show
his soapbox, and he is going to be.
He's like all of the internal monologue that I don't use. I appreciate him going out and sticking his chest out and saying what we want to say, but
somebody's got to say it, and Doug Russell's going to say it. All right.
He's turned into Russ Douglas, right? That's his
there
alter
we go.
ego, right?
Yeah.
I'll keep saying it.
Yeah.
So every Thursday on WIBN, I know this segment's running a little bit longer than originally planned, but I had a couple of things to say. I have a chance to catch up with the voice of the Badgers, Matt LePay, and this is in the aftermath. I mean, he's still rubbing the cobwebs out of his eyes off the plane from Ann Arbor from last night. But this morning, wanted to check in with Matt about this game and where this basketball team is. So this is from this morning on Madison in the Morning on our Madison flagship station for the Wisconsin Badgers, 1310 WIBA. I know teams go through ebbs and flows, and I know we try to look at all angles of losses to last place teams with a complete picture, but especially defensively, I'm not sure what to say about last night's loss at Michigan. I obviously watched the game and then listened to Greg with you and Butchie after the game. I mean, he sounds kind of frustrated with the defense right now.
Yeah, it's no matter what the record is of an opposing team right now, there are just certain matchups that are really tough for Wisconsin. And specifically with last night, it was Doug McDaniel. He's a really quick guard for Michigan, only playing home games. He's going through this academic discipline where he doesn't travel with Michigan, but he is available for their home games, and he's a problem. Not unlike the Penn State guards Wisconsin faced a few weeks ago in State College. You just get somebody who is able to drive the ball, who can seemingly take awkward looking shots, but in control. And he got into a rhythm early, and some other guys did as well, hitting some shots. Some were tough, some were not. But I just think that's a problem for Wisconsin, keeping the ball in front of them against players such as that. So that everybody, it seems, in college basketball is vulnerable somewhere, and it's no secret where Wisconsin is, and Michigan was able to take advantage. And I thought, too, Butchie and I talked about it during the game. Defensively, the intensity, the energy level wasn't there. Better in the second half, still fouled too much, but that first half just gave Michigan confidence, and it was a team wasn't playing with a whole lot of it, but they got some last night.
Over the last 3 games, and you've been front and center for all of them, Matt, what has Wisconsin done well that they can cling to try to snap out of this funk on Saturday?
For the most part, they have done well at getting points in the paint, and then you could flip that and say, well, do it even more and shoot fewer threes because they're not shooting the three well at all here in recent games. But they had, I think it was 40 paint points last night, and they were really good in the Purdue game in that area. The only game where they really were bad was Nebraska last week. That was their fewest points in the paint all year in that game against the Huskers. But their ability to get the ball inside, if it's a guard or if it's Tyler Wall doing his thing, you want to continue to build on that. And on top of that, get Stephen Crow going again. He's struggling specifically. He got foul trouble last night that limited his minutes, but he's a skilled player who's going through a tough stretch right now. So they find a way to get him going, then they can get more points in the paint and maybe take fewer threes, particularly early in the shot clock. It wasn't as much of an issue last night, but they're able to do some damage inside. You want to see them continue to try to do that, which will be difficult against Rutgers on Saturday.
Patrick Herb and I actually were talking about this on campus yesterday. I was talking to the new assistant coaches, the new football assistant coaches next to the Camp Randall Stadium in the lobby of the football building, the athletic building. And we were talking about the Purdue game. And I was a little bit encouraged by it. I know it was a loss, encouraged by it from the standpoint that the effort was there. The shots in the second half just didn't fall 0 for 11 from beyond the 3-point line. But I thought they played their hearts out against Purdue. I thought that, if there was going to be a springboard, it might have been from that. Yes, a few shots didn't fall, but Purdue's defense is so incredible. They, for the most part, especially in the first half, contained Zach Edey. And then it just last night felt like it was a little bit more of a kind of a back to the drawing board kind of feel.
Well, sometimes it's who you play, when you play them, or who you just played. I mean, North Carolina lost to a not great Clemson team at home. A couple days after the big game against Duke. Chapter 1 of the greatest rivalry in the history of the world, right? Duke Carolina.
Sure. Yeah.
So sometimes you and it goes back to my thought that everybody is vulnerable somewhere. And the Purdue game, yes. It shows you, and they still weren't, they checked a lot of boxes, but they settled. The shot selection wasn't great in stretches in that game. Yet, they took a team that, might be title good, national title good to the final minute. So look, this Wisconsin team at its best has proven it could play with most. The Marquette win, and it was a long time ago. Virginia obviously is getting better right now. They're in contention in the ACC and, other games there, but they've shown that, at their best, they're among the best in college basketball. But when they're not playing well, then they're as vulnerable as anybody. And that was proven last night. This is a tough trip for them now because they're going to Rutgers. Rutgers isn't all that great either,
right?
But their defensive efficiency numbers are second best in the country. They don't score, but they don't allow much either. So this has the makings of being kind of ugly, but if they can win it by one, they'll take it and fly home reasonably happy on Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, Wisconsin does get Rutgers on Saturday. Besides that defensive efficiency, what are you looking for when you look at Steve Pikiell's team? Like you said, their record isn't very good. It feels as though Pikiell seems to get the most out of his guys, though, every time that they go up against a team like Wisconsin that should beat them on paper.
Yeah, they have one of the best defensive players in the country in Cliff Amore. He's, among other things, a shot blocking machine. And they've also got a couple of guys who are just now getting on the floor the last couple of games. A big kid named Emmanuel Oboli, who's coming back from an ACL injury last year, and Jeremiah Williams, who has finally been cleared to play. He's been out there the last couple of games. He's a transfer. And he's scoring at a pretty good clip in his first two games at Michigan here last weekend, and then he had 14 against Maryland on Tuesday night. He's somebody, he's 6'4", maybe not the greatest jump shooter ever, but he can get to the rim. So they do feel like with Williams, they've got a little bit more punch offensively. But Amore is a force inside. Mawot Mag coming back from an injury. Last year, he's been back now for the last 14, 15 games or so. He can score it. He can be a problem. So, yeah, I think Pikiell's been there long enough. Rutgers, the reputation is there, even though they're sitting there 12-10, 4-7 in the Big Ten. But you're going to have to be ready because they're they have that, call it East Coast mentality, whatever you want to call it, but they're a tough physical team. Like I said, they don't score, but they don't give it up either. So for this highest scoring Wisconsin team in 3 decades, this has a game in the low 60s written all over it.
Saturday morning, 11 o'clock here in Wisconsin. The tip-off in Piscataway. The basketball Badgers trying to snap their 3-game losing skid. Matt LePay, the voice of the Badgers, will be on the call. He joins us here on Madison in the Morning. You alluded to it just a second ago, Matt, but this college basketball season, we've seen so many upsets, so many top 10 teams get beat. I mean, North Carolina's ranked 3rd, and they've got 5 losses. Kansas has 5 losses. Tennessee has 5 losses. They're all in the top 10. How wide open is the game right now?
As much as it's been, I think you just look at last year's Final Four, what that looked like. The teams, or
right.
A couple of years ago. I mean, you're seeing teams that don't normally, get that deep. They're a lot of these teams are the first weekend darlings, and then they start to fade away. I mean, look at UConn last year. It went through a stretch where they couldn't get out of its own way, and got on a roll, and obviously won it all. The Wisconsin team, I had to refresh my memory on this. The Wisconsin team in 2014 that went to the Final Four went through a stretch in late January, beginning of February, where the Badgers lost 5 out of 6. So teams go through this. And I'm not, trying to be, up with people, naive, everything's great, and wave the pom-poms. But I've been doing this long enough where I've seen teams go through this and then work their way out of it. But on the flip side, sometimes the wheels can fall off too. I get that. I've seen both sides of it. But when I've seen it close to home and then you see it from a distance, I get the frustration right now, but I pump the brakes on, bench this guy, fire that guy. I've seen the movie, and it's going to be fascinating for all of us who watch this team to see how they work themselves out of this. Because I think they've got talent. It's not a bunch of thick-ankled stiffs. They're guys who can play and guys who know how to play. So let's see how they get through all of this. But the big thing with college basketball right now, Doug, and there are a lot of reasons for it, you could be in 20-plus fan bases and think, hey, my team's got a shot here. They can really make a deep run. So it's going to create a lot of drama, but it's also going to create a lot of heartbreak for teams that you think are in that best 3-4 in the country that might not get out of the first weekend, depending on matchups. That was my conversation this morning on Madison in the Morning on 1310 WIBA with the voice of the Badgers, Matt LePay, after Wisconsin lost by 4, 72-68 last night at last place Michigan. Wisconsin has now lost 3 in a row. We'll take a short time out. I'm Doug Russell, Dave Gasper, and Nick Bruesewitz alongside as well. Stay with us. This is Badgers in 60 on the Game.
Come get me, come get me. So I got up and followed her to the floor.
Sock at the stinky feet with some free Iron Jock socks now through February 18th when you buy $75 or more of Iron Jock Performance apparel. Not only will you get 25% off of your entire order, but you'll also get 2 free pairs of black low-cut socks when you use promo code 25SOCKS. That's promo code 25SOCKS, 25% off your entire order. You don't need me to explain it. Code 25SOCKS now through February 18th. Go to ironjock.com for details. That is ironjoc.com. Badgers in 60 continues. I'm Doug Russell in for Hunter Baumgart. He is on assignment calling a basketball game. There is some severe weather both in Madison and in Milwaukee, so I hope that the basketball game can get in, but moreover, hopefully everybody out there is staying healthy and safe as well. Dave Gasper, Nick Bruesewitz alongside on Badgers in 60 as well. And thanks to Matt LePay for joining us, I would say in the last segment, but that was from this morning on Madison in the morning.
He joined you.
He joined me, yes.
When you were trying to talk, you were trying to talk down the line to us while we were off air. I was a little confused every once in a while. I thought you were giggling. I was like, nope, that was Doug from this morning. And then you said something now, and I was like, oh, that was Doug from now. I was like,
well, when Matt dropped the
so confused,
up with people,
it's very confusing. Yeah,
Doug was young and naive in that first clip. What we were playing back. I mean, he's now aged and
that was
weathered
11 hours ago. So yes,
older and therefore wiser,
something like that. Well, when we talked this morning, Patrick Beverly was still a Philadelphia 76er. So that's how much things have changed in the last 11 hours since when you heard that last interview. If you were listening this morning on Madison in the morning, and if you were, thank you. I did like the Up With People, which probably flew right over your heads, but was something in the 70s. Which was a halftime show that they actually would put on. You heard Usher going in to the halftime or to the break there, but he'll do the halftime festivities. They used to have marching bands. They used to have this group called Up With People, and they were 20 somethings who were just happy with life. And it was the 70s, so I think they might have been happy doing something else too.
It was a large ensemble, right? It was a really large group.
So you've heard of Up With People?
I've seen. Well, you say for the same reason you just said, they might have been doing a little something else in the 70s.
Sure.
I mean, we kind of get reference to what was this world? Why were these people in this big group? I've seen something from them. Yeah,
and I'm sure they've seen some things too. And but that's neither here nor there.
As we sit here, right, and we ponder, right, the younger version of you from just however many hours ago. I mean, it seems like we're in alternate reality, right? Pat Bev is on the Bucks, and this stuff with the Badgers, and Pete Thamel's kind of extrapolated upon it. Mike Vrabel, as a part of the Badgers coaching staff for the football team, potentially not coaching staff, maybe an analyst, whatever, around quote unquote around the team this spring. I mean, who would have thought just a couple months ago?
I would say senior analyst, perhaps.
Sure,
but
right?
I mean, it makes sense from this standpoint that he and Luke Fickell, obviously with the Ohio State connection that they have,
played together,
roomed together, very close friends. I don't know that many of us saw Mike Vrabel getting fired in Tennessee. I didn't know that was necessarily going to happen. This is a guy who's an NFL Coach of the Year. And even knowing that, you would have thought that he would have gotten another job because there were so many that were open this offseason, and he got passed over for all the ones that he interviewed for, which I think is crazy because I think he's a great coach
and who will coach again. Rationale too was the craziest part, I thought, right?
Because he's too large.
He's too big. Large, he's too commanding. He's too much of an alpha. What?
I don't know. That kind of sounds to me like the things you'd want in a coach.
You're talking about a prototype, perfect NFL head coach.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Well, no, and that's exactly what Luke Fickell is, though, too. If you spend 5 minutes with him, you're ready to run through a brick wall for the guy.
And that's the craziest part, right? I mean, if you end up with 2 of those, well, I mean, what? Yeah. Well, 2 guys in the same room like that?
Yeah. And one was an NFL Coach of the Year. And I know that Luke didn't have an NFL career, and Vrabel obviously did, and a very successful one with the Patriots as a player, and then as a coach with the Tennessee Titans. But this is a guy who's seen everything that you could possibly see, and he's a guy that, like that, instantly commands the room. So I would think that as much as you can, he can live in Luke's guest house. I mean, there are a couple of Luke's kids that are off in college right now. That's where Coach Vrabel can stay if he wants to stay there. He can have the basement if he likes. Whatever Coach Vrabel wants. He could be a senior analyst like Jim Leonard at Illinois. I'm not exactly sure what that all entails, but when you've got somebody who can command a room like a Mike Vrabel, who can with his stature or with the fact that he's had so much success in the NFL at the next level that every one of those other players is trying to get to, that's a slam dunk to try to bring the guy in.
Yeah, absolutely. And just having him around, even just for spring, even if it's not for the regular season. I mean, it can be something that can help set the tone, some things that he can see, and just be like, hey, like coach him up on a couple of pointers, like try doing this, try changing this. And then all of a sudden, like that can click. You can get that started in spring practice. And then by the time you get to the season, I mean, these guys could have it fully implemented. And it's just that I don't see any possible potential downside even to this at all.
And we had a fun time with Anthony Campanile on our program this week, and Doug showed me how to use the beeps to throw in the sensor beeps. So I wouldn't be shocked if we got some Mike Vrabel similar beeps. Type tape it down the road if he does end up with the Badgers. And this is a group that at times their defense looked uninspired this past year. It did feel this entire season was just kind of odd, and it was defensively. You move on from Jim Leonard, you bring in Mike Tressel, and Tressel, he does what he does. It just felt uncomfortable defensively, and I wouldn't be shocked if Mike Vrabel was brought in to address that, to put this team in the right spot moving forward.
Well, just the defensive side. I mean, for years, that's been the strength, you know, a big strength of this team, and we saw it take a step back this past season. So, that's exactly where bringing in a defensive guy like Vrabel could also be a factor as well.
And they brought in 3 new coaches that I got a chance to talk to yesterday. And one of them is Alex Grinch, who has not, and listen, I'll give him credit because he stood up there and he owned the failures that his defensive units have had the last 2 seasons at USC. And then even before that at Oklahoma, he has had success earlier in his career. Now that's not something that you can immediately look toward because listen, he was whacked by Lincoln Riley, one of his closest friends who he followed from Oklahoma to USC. He was whacked with 2 games left to play, and USC's defense was regularly giving up 40-plus points per game last year. So there are concerns. There are questions about that, and I think that there are fair questions to bring up. And the way that he has said it is that, yes, he's got a chip on his shoulder. Yes, we were not successful last year defensively at USC. He was the sole defensive coordinator. Now he'll be what Colin Hitchler was last year before Hitch went to Alabama to follow Kalen DeBoer down there, the new Crimson Tide coach, but he'll be the safeties coach and co-defensive coordinator. So, I mean, there's at least somebody else to bounce things off of. And there's a respect that the Tressel name has with Alex Grinch because Alex Grinch, like seemingly everybody that they bring in, has a tie to Ohio State. He was an assistant coach in 2018 with the Buckeyes.
It's a great pivot too, Doug, because I got a little something here from Alex Grinch from what you got us as a station.
Looking at jobs that I've been fortunate over the last 20 or some odd years to be a number of places all over the country. A place with just those things, elite leadership, an elite program with a tried and true approach, and a town like this, a college like this, from an academic standpoint, because from a sales standpoint, you got to do that with recruits. Goodness gracious, that checks a lot of boxes.
Yeah, he understands this opportunity with the Badgers is one that he described as an elite program, right? Elite coaching staff in a perfect situation. Checks all the boxes for him. So he's going to have an opportunity here. He's had a couple of down years. He's had a 20-year career, right? That would be a proven track record until recently of being successful. So I'd imagine if you can get Grinch and Vrabel, just reinforcements to this defensive group. Mike Tressel, of course, he's got a track record himself of being a strong defensive coach. So I think they can get it right, and they've got their first official class of recruits under Luke Fickell in this group. So I'm excited to see what that could be, especially if Mike Vrabel's in town.
Yeah, and they've got a lot of these recruits on the defensive side of the ball, and now as they're kind of bringing in their own guys and being able to, backfill, all the departures that they've had, and just being able to get into this second year of the system. I mean, the first year, new coach, Fickell comes in. There's a whole bunch of turnover on the roster, but the coaching staff, everything. And now, like we've really kind of seen, it's like, okay, this is what we have. And now they can really take a really good long look at it and address it and make the changes that are necessary. Because, going into that first year, there was a lot of hype around this team that they didn't really live up to, but we didn't really know what they had. I don't even think the coaches fully knew what they had with that team, just with all the turnover. And now, having seen that full season, you can get a couple new pairs of eyes in, and they've seen that Fickle, Tressel, the whole coaching staff, they've seen what they've needed to from this group, and they can make the adjustments now heading into year 2.
And I should mention that Alex Grinch, earlier in his career, a 2-time finalist for the Broyles Award given to the country's top assistant coach. And, it's not an accident that somebody gets on that list. Last couple of seasons, they've struggled, but, he's also made the intimation that whenever you are going to be a defensive coach under Lincoln Riley, it's buyer beware, because he recruits offense, doesn't necessarily recruit defense, and you still need players to win. The best coach in the world can have crappy players and be thought of as a crappy coach. So there's just food for thought there. But they
brought in two offensive coaches, right, that you spoke to yesterday too. Kenny Guyton will be taking over with the wide receivers. He's got a connection to Luke Fickell. Fickell was with him at Ohio State, different side of the ball, but there's a connection there. And on top of that, AJ Blazek's going to become the 4th offensive line coach in 4 years. So if you're Jack Nelson, if you're one of those guys that's been around, Maulman, right, you're going to have to adjust again. And this group, he feels, can do that. They've seen different types of offense, and they could be big in their roles this season.
There were 2 things that struck me about AJ Blazek. Now, the first one is Blazek, but hang on. He made it a point when he came into the room, because he's heard Blazek his entire career, his entire life. And the first thing that he said was that the correct pronunciation is Blazek. And he's not offended by Blazek, but the radio and the TV guys that were in the room, it's like, okay, thank you, because otherwise we would have been guessing the entire season or mispronouncing his name. So it's Blazek, and that's the first thing that struck me about him. The second thing that struck me about him, along with winning a press conference that he didn't have to win. If you're the head coach, you have to win that press conference. The offensive line coach doesn't necessarily have to win that press conference. But we were all looking around like we want to go out and, suit up for this guy, how positive he is, how much, experience that he brings, and his enthusiasm for being at Wisconsin. He was an all Big Ten center at Iowa. So he's back in the Midwest. And he came from Vanderbilt, came from the SEC, where he was an offensive line coach for the last several seasons. But the other thing is, and this has never happened to me in my 30-plus year career doing sports media, after he was done with his news conference, he made it a point to introduce himself and shake the hand of every single reporter and cameraman that was in the room. That has never happened to me in my life. And you know what? I can mess with a guy like that. I can play for a guy like that. I can root for a guy like that. And it just struck me, if that's how personable he is to a bunch of schmo reporters that he doesn't have to, win over, imagine what he's going to be like on the recruiting trail.
Yeah, and with those guys currently in that locker room, because as you mentioned, Nick, 4 offensive line coaches in 4 years. There's been a lot of turnover at that spot, and being able to get that spot solidified and just where it's not a worry, where there's not the turnover there anymore, and just being able to get that kind of consistency on the offensive line. Because as we talk about, identities in Wisconsin sports, we talk about it with basketball and the defensive side and the inside out offense. With football, the identity, offensive line. It's what it has been for years.
1,000%.
Wisconsin is an offensive line factory, and just having this much turnover, it's really it's not common in Wisconsin football. So being able to get this hire right is so important for Wisconsin, and being able to make it something they don't even have to worry about for the next several years, trying to find a coach there, being able to have a consistent presence in that spot is so huge. And Doug, as you mentioned, just making a great first impression, AJ Blazek.
Absolutely. All right, we'll take a short time out. We'll be back, wrap things up, talk about some hockey here on Badgers in 60, because you've got 2 hockey teams right now that are ranked in the top 5. One of them's a national champion. One is making a shocking run that I don't think anybody saw, but it's a lot of fun to watch. We'll hit that coming up as we wrap up Badgers in 60 straight ahead here on The Game. Last couple of minutes of Badgers in 60. Doug Russell, along with Dave Gasper, Nick Bruesewitz as well. The Badgers hockey teams. The women are ranked second. The men are ranked fourth. Now, the women are defending national champs, so you could see them being ranked second and not bat an eye. But the job that Mike Hastings has done in his first year as Badgers men's hockey coach, just incredible. He has got to be the odds-on favorite for his, not first, second, third, his fourth National Coach of the Year award.
It's been a great run. I mean, it's been such a shock, like you said, Doug. They were 13-23 last year with a darn good head coach in Tony Granato. It just didn't seem to be working anymore. So they move on. They get the guy from Minnesota State who has just been in the national championship. And Mike Hastings has been star. I mean, he's been a star. He's brought this group together and he's brought some guys with him. But 26-2 coming off of a shootout, I guess, tie, if we want to break it down like that. But they won the shootout over Minnesota, and they'll now host Notre Dame for a pair of contests tomorrow and Saturday.
Yeah, and it's such a quick turnaround. I mean, this is something that, I mean, perhaps most of us were expecting from the football team, you know, the first year of Luke Fickell. But, I mean, the first year of Mike Hastings, I mean, it has been fantastic, just a turnaround where they have themselves in the conversation. I mean, Wisconsin men's hockey has been such a top program for so long. Just not having a great season last year, you got to have the change. And I mean, give credit to Chris McIntosh, another just home run hire with Hastings and where he's gotten this Badgers team.
Yeah, I mean, I don't say this lightly because I think there's probably some arrogance when people say that this is better because of that. But college hockey is better when Wisconsin is good. It just is. It's the natural order of things. Minnesota is supposed to be good. Wisconsin is supposed to be good, but Wisconsin hasn't been very good for most of the last decade plus. I know they had a nice
championship since 2006.
Yeah.
I mean, that speaks for itself, right? That they haven't really been to that mountaintop and gotten to the top of it. But the women's team has. Yeah. The women's team continues to
multiple
beat on.
times.
Yeah. I mean, they continue to beat 7 championships with Mark Johnson as their head coach, and they've been electric this year, as per usual, right? They're on an 11-game win streak. They're going to go to Bemidji State for their last 2 road games of the regular season coming up this weekend. And 24-4, no ties this season. And I think this group is as good as they've had in a long time. And that's hard to say because they've reached and they've gotten Caroline Harvey, Defender of the Week, WCHA, Lacey Eden's become a star, Casey O'Brien. This group is stacked. And I mean, what can I say? I would be blown away if they weren't ever within the top 5 in the country.
Now, right now, ranked second and the defending national champions. And as Mark Johnson pointed out yesterday, they don't have to go on the road anytime soon. They've got the Bemidji State games on the road this weekend, and then they're home for their last 2 series of the season, and then they've got home ice advantage. So they don't have to go anywhere else. That's going to be huge. So this has been fun, boys. You get Hunter back, I think, next week. I'm not sure if you do or not, but this has been a fun Badgers in 60. We'll
and next week we should be live from the Kohl Center. So
there you
stay
go
tuned for that. We'll be live from the Kohl Center ahead of the Badgers men's basketball game.
All right.
Against Ohio State.
Well, that'll be a good one. Hopefully Wisconsin rights the ship against Rutgers this weekend. Of course, those games can be heard in Madison on WIBA 1310 and in Milwaukee on 97.3 The Game. Dave, Nick, great stuff. We'll talk to you soon. All right, that's it for this edition of Badgers in 60. Have a great day, everybody. We will hopefully be talking to you next after a Badgers win on Saturday with these guys. I'm Doug Russell. Have a great night.